Gravity crystal was not in full strength. It would reach out to the water that was closest to it. And this water, the Bible, if you look up the word water, it doesn't mean water. It means dual. It had a dual purpose. It was actually a chemical soup. In other words, it was sediment suspended in water. And I'm going to tell you in a few minutes why that had to happen that way, because of that light that was created at the 12th hour. Remind me. Okay, this chemical soup began to be drawn into this gravity crystal, and as it did, it was very hot, and the water would explode into steam.
Evaporate,
absolutely. And because water molecule can be held together, it's almost indestructible. In fact, the little water molecule that was created on the first day still is circulating in the air somewhere today.
Surely you can't be serious. I am serious. And don't call me Shirley.
They're almost virtually indestructible. Okay. As this water hit this gravity crystal, it was very, very hot, and extreme heat can break that molecule apart. And the hydrogen cannot be held onto by the fingers of gravity. This is just one little interesting tidbit in the book. And they drift off into space. They're just gone. But anyway, as this process continued, the gravity crystal was finally insulated by sediment turning into real rock, and this created labyrinths, and the underground lakes and rivers that we have and all this are, it forms our water supply. And these are, of course, there was other layers that came on them and crushed them, and this almost like creation of a pearl in an oyster. It's formed concentric little shells. The earth is created with concentric little buildup, almost like a mason laying blocks. So it's a perfect sphere. And at the end of this process, and when this whole nebula was collapsed from space, first of all, there was no light, you couldn't really see it, but it would have looked like a great ball of vapor. Imagine that. Now there's too much water here. We've got water everywhere. There's water going, thousands of miles out into space, and there's got to be some dry land made and so forth. So I was telling you that water molecule is virtually indestructible, but something can destroy it, and that's ultraviolet radiation. Okay? Now, let's take that into the immediate news today. If you read the news today or yesterday on the internet, it's going to talk about NASA putting a lander on Mars. And guess what they found up there? Water. NASA has found water on Saturn and the rings of Saturn. There's supposed to be giant chunks of ice rotating around that planet. They found ice on comets. They found ice in planets way out here somewhere that, billions of miles from us. And most specifically, on Mars. Did they find water on Mars?
You want answers? I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth! You can't handle the truth!
I'll tell you the answer is no. And here's why. When something very miraculous happens when you destroy an H2O molecule, the H's float off into space, but the O's recombine to form ozone. We have an ozone layer on the Earth, which was formed from all this water being destroyed. Now, let's go back a second. God spent 36 hours, that seems like a very long time, in creation, right? In the creation mode, to do something. And that was to destroy all of this excess water. So the light that he created, now I won't get into what that light was, that's in book 4. But this light that he created now constitutes the sun, and once you know what that light was, you know what makes the sun shine, and this is some major news coming out on this.
Are you saying that the sun, with its radiation, evaporates anything other than the water that is on this planet?
It will evaporate all water.
Okay.
I mean, it is a water killer.
Okay, because it separates. It is the only thing that can separate the H from the 2 times O.
H2O, right.
Right.
The reason it does that, well, I won't get into that. It takes more time than we have here. But
it is in the book?
Yes, it is in the book. It's explained fully. It's called photodissociation. That means light is dissolving it, breaking it apart. And so, again, the H's drift off into space, but the O's recombine to form the ozone layer. So we have an ozone layer out here in space, and it blocks ultraviolet radiation. That's why we have the water we have today. Now let's look at Mars. Water everywhere up there. Mars does not have an ozone layer. So if it had water at any other time in history, the sun, the rays putting forth of the sun, would have disassociated all water on Mars, and it would have been done very quickly. So there cannot be any water in space. So why do NASA scientists believe that there is? First of all, they're evolutionists, almost 100%. They are looking to prove that Darwin is correct. If they find water out here, they can also say that there was little unique cells out here that are growing, and they can prove evolution, but they can't prove it. Now, If the rings of Saturn were, chunks of ice floating around there, they would have been taken care of very quickly. It would have taken 36 hours to get rid of those.
Well, I have to laugh because the people that listen to our broadcast, of course, at The Edge, are very much into listening to science shows. But when I watch the news about the Mars scooping up what looked to be either salt or ice, I don't know if you heard that.
I have.
The spoon fell off and missed putting it into the bucket, and I laughed to myself. I said, "Oi, God's helping him," because just as they got their first scoop, the whole thing busted and it fell off the. Did you hear about that?
I did. And the screen was too little for the particles to go in.
I immediately thought about you, and it was just a funny coincidence.
Yeah, the thing I found out that if you try to eliminate a creator and just say he does not exist, as Darwin did.
As for me and my house, we shall serve the Lord.
In fact, Darwin said he had once believed in God, but he had put it away from him. He had made his mind up to put away God. And it was as difficult as a monkey to put away the instinct fear of a snake. Imagine that comparison. So when you have evolutionist scientists and you have agnostics and atheists running NASA, which they are, in fact, a recent survey showed that only 7% of scientists, and this is the NAS scientists, this is the premier group of scientists, had a personal relationship with God. In other words, they had no regard for God. And so when you have this, I know that the Bible says that if you lack wisdom, pray for wisdom and God will abundantly give. If you're trying to explain anything in evolutionary terms, your surmises are going to be an error. It's just a fact of the way. But they don't really see the error. They see water everywhere. Now, in the news not too long ago, they showed a patch of ice inside of a crater in Mars, and they said, well, this cannot be carbon dioxide, because that's what's on Mars, is a carbon dioxide atmosphere. When it gets real cold at night, it actually falls to the earth in little pebbles, and it creates what looks like snow. But it's not. It's not snow as we think of snow being water ice, okay? It's actually carbon dioxide, and carbon dioxide is a killer of life. It destroys life. Nothing can exist in the midst of carbon dioxide. So they said, NASA said that this cannot possibly be carbon dioxide because it's too late in the season. Well, it wasn't too late in the season if there was a patch of ice there or a patch of carbon dioxide. So when they see this glycerine thing, it's probably carbon dioxide that's been covered by what I call a clutter storm. Now let me just talk about that a little bit. Okay, when the astronauts stepped on the moon, and they really did, there's some theories out here that this was all done in a TV setting or whatever. But when they stepped out on the moon, it was pristine. Nothing had been disturbed. In other words, there were little pebbles there that had a little bit of dust coming up on them. Nothing had been disturbed. Now, this may come as a surprise to most of you because scientists teach us that these craters up there were created by asteroids and so forth slamming into the moon, right? If they had, there would have been debris everywhere. Everything would have been in clutter and messed up. But it wasn't. And when they brought back samples of the moon, and especially what that dust was, because the dust kind of clumped together, and when it would clump together and you try to pour it out of the beaker, it would just wait, and finally it would roll out as a bunch. And that's exactly what NASA is explaining when that little hand is going out, that little arm, and taking a scoop up. They said it's sticking together. It's like it's oily or whatever. And I'm going to tell you why that does that. But anyway, when they brought that dust back and put it under a microscope, guess what it was? It wasn't dust at all. It was little spiracles of glass, little beads of glass. And that's put out through volcanism or eruptions. And so when they brought away, like 79% of some of the samples of the moon was all glass, and it was colored glass. And so if the moon, since I spoke that, I'm going to get into something else real quickly, just give you a little bit of tidbit of what the book's all about, because it's not all science. There's a lot of, heavy science. A lot of it's fun science. For instance, NASA, and I like to talk about NASA because they're on such a roll with this evolution and the stars and all this. Dead planets, new planets being created, the Great Bang Theory, dead stars, just their imagination has no end to it, okay? When they look at Jupiter, and I think most of you have seen a picture of Jupiter, it has a great red spot. And that red spot goes around very, very quickly and rotates very quickly. And it does that year after year, millennia after millennia, and that spot is in the same place. NASA will tell you that that's a sea of gas up there, and that the colors of the gas are causing the ripple effect and all this, that you can see all this. Well, let's put a little science to it that's not overly influenced by evolution.